Welcome back. Hey guys, welcome back. We're here for another episode and we're in LA. This is currently where we're filming just because Dad is visiting.
It's the West Coast studio.
It's the West Coast studio. What's good?
Good to see y'all.
We're excited. We're excited to be back on the mics.
We have to get we've got a lot of things we've been talking about. What kind of prompted, really, if you go back to what prompted this podcast or the idea behind it, was conversations we would have. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes we would get into these conversations, last an hour or, over a week's period of time. We'd talk a few times on the phone or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it really became kind of enjoyable to have dialogue. And especially as a father and a daughter scenario, it's good that, we seek each other's thoughts and ideas on topics and create a scenario where there's really good dialogue. So earlier today, when we were thinking about different things to discuss that might help be beneficial, I asked Genelle a question. I said, tell me a time in your life when you were settled. And, the word settled could mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but in this instance, it was where you felt like everything was in harmony, like everything was flowing. I don't want to say perfect, because I don't know if perfect's the right word, but just seemed really like just everything was right, And what was everything? Relationships, your physical well-being, your monetary situation. So, those are three if you take just those three, right? Relationships, so husband and wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it is. If you take your physical health, right? If you're eating right, exercising, whatever, and then your financials, if you can get those three, which relationships includes your spiritual life as well, man, if you have all those in perfect harmony, that's a pretty good thing. And this really stemmed too from...
it's hard though.
Yeah, well, Genelle called me months and months ago and she says, why does life have to be so hard? And it's kind of interesting because...
So embarrassing of me to ask.
Well, but it does feel... I mean, that's I think that's honest. I really think there's a lot of people could certainly have the same thoughts at times.
Okay.
Including myself. And there are times in your life where you go, man, life is hard.
Right.
Or am I ever going to get ahead? Or are things going to get better? And so on. So anyway, I use this term settled. So I asked Genelle, and you want to share that time in your life. And here's what was interesting. When I asked Genelle the question, she knew exactly. You didn't hesitate to pick that time in your life when you were the most settled. So right. Why don't you share you don't have to get into specific details, but what was going on? What was in your mind happening where you immediately went to that time, which was several years ago, and that space of time, and then also share how long did it really last?
Yeah, so the most I've ever felt settled, and I'm not saying my life was perfect by any means, but the most settled and secure. I like to feel secure, so I found that when I was making the most money, and at the same time, the relationship I was in at the time, the communication was on point, and we were kind of in sync. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so it was the most money I ever made.
So
my career was going well.
Professional, okay.
Yep. And then my relationships, communication, and just the way that we were was really flowing.
And you were healthy.
Yep, I was healthy, and I could basically do whatever I wanted. I was living the dream, like the little dream. I was just starting to make music, and I had a budget to do so and make music videos, and yeah, that was
where that took us to, and how long would you say that moment in time? How long did it last?
It lasted 6 months, probably.
6 months. So for a 6-month period, and this was how many years ago?
A few. I'm not going to say the exact
year.
Okay.
So the point being is Genelle could pinpoint the time. Mm-hmm. She can remember how she felt, right? How her view of life was. That everything was in sync for her. Everybody's got different things that need to be aligned to be in that settled position. But she was really feeling good, loving life,
was.
living the dream, as you said. So what I dug into a little bit there was her parameters for being settled were the items she listed, right? The money, the relationship, the health, overall well-being. Because all that was in sync, you were settled. Now, what I challenged her on is that, does it always have to be those specific areas in order to be settled? Does it have to be, money, relationships, personal well-being, which is your mental and physical health, your spiritual health? Are those the ones that we should all gauge ourselves on? And it led into the discussion was, have we created those buckets, or has society created those for us? In other words, you could even use the word happy if you want to throw that out there about, well, I'm happy when this, and this are happening.
I would say that it probably varies from person to person.
Okay.
I would say, money might not mean a lot. I know money is important, right? It's what makes the world go round. But I would say money isn't always important, like to my little brother. Maybe, his amount of money, he still could feel very unsettled in other areas of his life. Because money, even if he was making money, to him, he could still be very unsettled.
Sure.
Where I find value in a partnership, like a partner, a loyal partner and or best friend. And I find a ton of value in obviously the relationship with my family, which I really make sure to maintain. That's pretty the relationship with my brothers and my dad, pretty much, it would be weird to really hit these crazy.
So it's consistency.
Yeah. When the family life is pretty much always consistent and in a good spot, besides one thing about my family, but that's a whole different thing. But money and my love life, if I have a partner and I'm growing towards a loyal, long, loving relationship, that's where I really feel my most energetic, settled, unsettled type of person. Because right now I feel unsettled. And I feel as a human being, it's just inevitable that you're going to feel a little unsettled because nothing in life is perfect, right? You have all these things going right.
You're going to go through tribulation. You're going to have peaks and valleys in your life.
Yeah.
And those are what, so that's a great lead in. So as we go through life, as we get older, the settledness can evolve in terms of looking through a different pair of glasses at what could be the things. And remember, when we say being settled, it's a sort of satisfaction that you have in life. And you can have glimpses of that every day of the week. Mm-hmm. You can have glimpses of that for weeks on end. You could have glimpses of that for months on end, for years on end. It just depends on how what pair of glasses you're looking through. As an example, when I was sharing this with Genelle, I said, I went out for a bike ride. I've always loved riding my bike. And I did a ride I hadn't done in a long time that was more physical and a little more harder for me. And I got home and I was sort of exhilarated by the fact that I had done this. And I had a lot of self-satisfaction as a result of that. And I weighed in a lot of factors to get to that. So it was like a mental game for me to some extent to say, my age, how long I've been doing this, just different things, physical challenges I have, whatever it is. And I thought, gosh, I had this moment of being really settled. It was this almost like I came in the house, sat down, and I remember just thinking, that's like a great moment, mm-hmm. right? So I captured that in my mind. I said, wow, I captured that. Now, 20 minutes later, an hour later, 30 minutes later, maybe I got a phone call that ruined everything, or, some other thing happened. So we have to be in a mindset to say, if we're setting these parameters about being settled are based on what we talked about with Genelle, and we're always trying to use that as our sort of end point or end goal, maybe sometimes we need to think about what will really make us settled. So if money is one of the things that a certain type of money or amount of money that'll make you settled, you may not really know that until you get that.
Which I did.
Right.
I did, yeah.
Or you get there and maybe it's everything and more and makes you feel good, but maybe there's another part of your life that's not where it needs to be. So the idea of getting all of these all together all at once, as you said, was a few years back, and it was for a certain amount of time, is why we really have to be realistic on what we're trying to use as those parameters. Does that make you kind of follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think that's where, faith comes in. I think when, if you finally achieve the relationship and the money, maybe something in your family is going wrong. Maybe someone gets sick. Maybe you get sick. Maybe you're sick and you have all this money and you just got to wait out this sickness, So I think then that's where there are those little empty gaps where everything isn't perfect, because life will never be perfect.
A great quote, to interrupt you, sorry,
Sure.
is Steve Jobs. Everybody knows who he is. Hopefully they do. If you have an Apple product, Steve Jobs was is the inventor of that. Well, he passed at 56, and he had he died of cancer. And during his long, drawn out, disease, he said, I have all this money, but I can't pay someone to take my disease. Right. So he literally would have gave all his money to have that health. Now, let's just say that was an option. Maybe he would have used all billions that he had to get his health back, and then he didn't have any money. Maybe then he would either be, well, I need to get the money back. Or maybe he'd be like, you know what? I realized that I don't need money as much as I want my health and my relationship with my wife and my children.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have to go through these periods of unsettledness in order to recalibrate to be settled. I'm not saying you've done that. I don't know. You what do you think? So if you looked at that period of time and you go, this was working, this was working, this was working, if today you got right back in those same buckets were all firing on all cylinders, would you think you'd be settled?
Well, I'll never be 100% settled. So
Okay.
that's like what I was saying. As a human being, nothing ever is going to be perfect. I have turmoil with a family member of mine that will forever be something I'm dealing with.
All right.
Yeah. I don't think I could ever be perfectly settled, especially with, my situation with someone in my family. It's just, that's going to be something I have to accept, that will never be a perfect scenario for me. It just
But don't
won't.
you think you can compartmentalize that in a way?
I can, but I think with, how they evolve in age and, whatever,
Okay. Yep.
because there is a health issue there. I
Okay.
don't know how I'm going to like deal with that. So it could be,
So it's there.
It could be very easy breezy. I could be overthinking it. I think,
but if those other items were all dialed in,
Yeah,
but you still had that one around the corner.
I'll still somewhat be like 10% unsettled because
Okay.
of that.
Gotcha.
I've accepted that
That's
in
a
my
good-
life.
okay.
Yeah. Now I will say, would I take 90% settled over 30% settled and 70%? Yeah, of course. So I think what you just said, you go, sometimes when you're settled, you get to an unsettled area and you have to do some things to unsettle yourself to get back to being settled.
That's right.
So with that, right now I'm kind of in an unsettled area of my life.
Yeah. In fact, when I talked to you before I came out here, you were like, I got to change it up.
I have to.
So, but that brings on an interesting point. So, and I said, radical change, minor changes. So what adjustments? Sometimes we make good. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
We can make good adjustments to get us back on track, or we make a radical decision that makes us farther away. Can happen.
I think with what I'm doing is like, I want to move and downsize, and living in a box, like I want to downsize to a smaller apartment, whatever. I may not be as happy, but I know that like my financials put such a big burden on me that if I'm lacking there, I'm more settled in a little box with more money in my account than I am in a big apartment with my money just draining. So I think with the decisions that I have to make, they have to be a little bit more radical coming up here. I think it's going to shake me up, and I think I'm going to put myself in a uncomfortable position. But it's almost a little exhilarating because every time I have been in a very uncomfortable position, comfort comes like shortly after.
I always tell you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so, that was a lot of focus on the finances. So relationships.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Which can be an area we all have unsettled things going on, as you just alluded to.
Right.
And we do have options there. And this goes back to a podcast we did a while ago about what you can control and what you can't. And in the case of relationships, if that area of your life is unsettled, you can change. You can make
the
changes.
Relationships?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you have a friend that's toxic or...
But not always, some people are in marriages. Like, it's not... You went through a divorce. It's not so easy just to be out of it.
Well, you ultimately make those changes. I'm not saying it to snap the fingers.
Right.
Just like your money situation. Oftentimes, you have to put things in motion.
Right.
So I think what we're getting at, because we could turn this into a deep dive, and that's not what we wanted to just get you thinking about this idea of being settled or unsettled, as the term we decided to use. And thinking about yourself. This is the homework. Think about a time in your life where you were the most settled. And if you once you do that, write down what it was at that time that made you settled. So for Genelle, she was very clear. It was these 3 or 4 things. When those were all in sync, I'm like,
I feel good.
Life is good. I'm, singing
no one
in the
can
sunshine.
tell me anything.
Yeah. And so the good news with that, when you're in that mindset, a lot of times you can continue that. You can, unless something out of your control comes in, and that's the stuff you don't see always coming, so it's hard. You just got to deal with it. But when you're thinking about those things, so for me, as an example, one of my key areas is my physical health. And I know that when I'm in a physical health mode and I'm clicking that is really, really helps my feeling settledness for sure. I'm not saying it's the first thing, but it's an important one that I really, and that's why it's part of my life. So the money thing is for everyone. I'm sure that's one of those items. I think the spiritual and mental health is got to be one of those. So
so that's what I was saying. So I was saying when I am feeling unsettled, that's where my faith comes in, and I have to, like right now I'm feeling pretty unsettled and I'm trying to find answers. Sometimes I just have to look to the Lord and just be like, please help me make decisions. I need guidance, because I also think when you are making rational decisions or bigger decisions,
rational or irrational?
Irrational. I'm sorry. Based on emotion. If you're acting irrationally, I'm sorry. I think you really need to ground yourself if you are faith-based and take time to, I've been journaling. I've been really asking God to please guide me to this right decision, because I want to do what's best for my situation. And by the way, if you are a believer, there are some situations you can be put in when you are asked that you may not want to be in for that time. It's not always rainbows and butterflies. And
unicorns.
Unicorns and butterflies.
Rainbows, unicorns, and butterflies.
Yeah, rainbows, unicorns, and butterflies. So I think another point to this unsettled and settled thing, when you are in a moment of being settled, but there's a little piece that maybe is making you, take these other things for granted. I think there were times where I was more settled than I am now, and I took that time for granted. I kind of maybe didn't treat the people around me as good as maybe I should have.
Good insight.
Because I was focusing on still the small unsettled stuff. So I think now that I'm really unsettled where I'm at, I'm like, wow, I'm going to take the time to really be so thankful when I get back, because I know I'll get back to that place. But when I get back to that place of being more settled and really not taking that for granted and living in that moment, because so often we get in these places and we're like, okay, we're making money. Okay, we have a good relationship. Okay, whatever. And then we're maybe treating people not the best, or we get stagnant with our partner or a friend, or we're not calling our family when we should because we're just so wrapped up in maybe someone who gave you some BS while you were driving or whatever it is. So I think in this, whether you're in a really good spot or you're feeling more unsettled like I am, turning to God, honestly, when you're making decisions to really help ground yourself will get you in a position back on your path. Because I think he doesn't always want us to be comfortable, but I think he wants us to be progressing. I don't think he ever wants us to be stagnant. And I think right now, my unsettledness also is a
stagnation. Yep.
Yeah. Which is so unsettling and so bothersome for like my soul. Because I'm definitely a moving forward type of person. I like progression. I like working towards something. And I feel like sometimes if I'm spinning my wheels or I'm seeing no outcome from hard work, I'm like, okay, praying about it because I need direction. So that's like my 2 cents for that.
Yeah. And I think, when you mention the spiritual thing, it's important, Jesus is very clear in the Bible that we will have tribulation. And why, people say, well, why? Oftentimes it's so we can grow as a person. So this unsettledness and what you just articulated and how you articulated it is there's growth there, right? So while I'm thinking about dialing in these areas that I know will get me more settled,
right?
I'm growing as a person on that journey to that. So that's the part we have to remember, right? It's not necessarily the destination. It's the journey to get to the destination. So the journey to get to that settledness can be as satisfying as getting to it, right? Because you took these steps to get there, right?
Right.
So the beauty in that, you just said that. The beauty in that is, man, if I know what I need to click off to get there, right? Like I'm heading in this direction. Like we do a hike when I come out here, and it's been really a challenge for me. And I'm a guy that I keep score, right? I keep like times of Strava. And so I told myself, actually, it's funny, I didn't tell even Genelle this, but coming out here, I was like, I'm going to beat my time from the last time.
Okay.
And so today we went out on a pretty decent pace, and it's all uphill. It's a good, 20 minutes uphill, I would say?
Yep.
I mean, and the very last section is steep. And I was actually trying to pick it up going up this, it's a hike, it's not a run. And so we clicked out and we went all the way to the end, and then came back down. We got back, and I set a PR, my best time.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. It ended up being in the one section. And so I was like, cool, I kind of, that made me feel good.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that's like a win.
Yeah.
And those small wins are what gets you to the destination, which is the settledness in life. And then you'll get there, and then it'll come back, and you'll have to get back up the journey to get to the destination. And you come back down. And this process, then as time goes on, what you said there in that last section was you learn what it is. That's the most important. And that's the message here. Because people will say all the time, well, if I only had this, my life would be perfect. Or if I had that.
Well, here's my question to you.
Uh-oh.
When I'm making good money,
okay,
and this is my definition. So if you're out there and you're listening, think about what you would consider, if you were making this amount of money, you'd feel good. I'm not saying 10 billion. I mean, if 10 billion is what's going to only make you feel good, I'm going to pray for you. But anyways, so my question to you is, I have found through earning money and then not earning money at times, I feel most settled when my money is like right before relationships, because my money gives me this security where like if someone screws me over, I'm good. I'm not living with someone and stuff.
Well, I could really dig into this one. That's a whole podcast.
Is it okay?
Yeah, because
is
what
that
you're
bad?
doing. Well, bad isn't the right word. So you quoted some or made some mention of the spiritual side of things. God tells us to store our treasures up in heaven.
Right.
So when we think about, let's just say for the sake of this conversation that the money side of things is you're able to manage your bills, you're able to save a little bit of money, you have the food that you want to buy within reason, the basics, right?
Right.
That when that all feels, there's a level of security for that, or the sense that you've got that part under control, there is a sense of settledness. Now, there are people who live in a 1,000 square foot house that aren't settled until they're in a 2,000 square foot house, or in a 3,000 square foot, or they not settle until they have a better car or a nicer car or a certain car or whatever.
I get that.
That's a chase, but that's a chase.
Yeah.
So where I'm going is that if you're always chasing, I've been guilty of that, where I'm always chasing. So therefore, I'm never settled. Now, the good news is that I was driven to achieve certain goals, so I could, in fact, get to what and by the way, oftentimes I thought that if I did these things, I would get to this certain goal and be settled. Mm-hmm. So I think what you're saying is the money thing has to be what you believe to be that will work for you.
Yeah, I found that I'm just like more insecure in myself with like dating and all of that when my money is not right.
Okay.
But when my money was right, I honestly was able to kind of care less about stuff.
And by the way, that's not uncommon, but
Okay.
you have to be careful with that.
Yeah.
Because money is, as we know, while we all need it and it's part of reality, you can't get around that.
And it can't be my idol too.
That's exactly right. Well said. So I don't need to say any more about that. So I think just to kind of bring this to some thoughts, as I mentioned, think about what makes you settled. Think about what that looks like. You know, in a few podcasts back, we got into goal setting and writing down goals. So this all comes back to that. This all of this intertwines. A lot of our podcasts, if you really thought about them, and our hope was when we got started doing this was that as you listen to them, they somehow will fit together nicely. You know, in these areas of life that we're working on, we're getting to think about, if you will. And so if you leave this podcast and go, I am kind of unsettled. Okay. So one, what are the things that need to be figured out to be settled? And again, it's probably going to fall in similar categories, but to each his own, we're all different. And then look at each one of those and say, which one of those do I have impact on? What can I do to make those, to get to that point where it'd be settled? And then put a plan in place. I mean, I don't mean to simplify it to that degree because there's obstacles, of course, but that's how you have to really break it down. And so I think that way all the time. Now, sometimes while you're going through that, you might go, well, I don't like my job. So let's just say that's one of the things you're not settled about. So you say, okay, I'm going to change jobs. Now, you don't just go in tomorrow and quit your job and go look for another job. You be strategic about it, right? You go, okay, I'm going to start looking for another job. And think about what job you believe would make you happy, or maybe you need to make a little more money, whatever it is. Then start pursuing that, right? Start going after that while you work your current job, and then you move towards that. And here's the good news about this kind of thinking is that let's say all that happens and you end up getting the new job. And 6 months into the new job, you're like, oh, I don't like this job. You just repeat the same process, right? You just lather, rinse, repeat. So you're not necessarily forever stuck, is the idea. Because your settledness may change 10 years from now.
Right.
Right? What makes you happy or settled, today may be different, way different. I can tell you that for sure. That at this time in my life is definitely different than when I was your age, for sure. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that makes sense. Did you find that when we were talking about that earlier?
It did. It made a lot of sense, and a lot is hitting me. I feel like I need to I
can tell already. Your brain is like, woo, I can see it.
Yeah.
So I think that's why we decided to make a recording of this, because it really was just one of those dialogues. Genelle and I will often do this. She'll call me and I'll be on my tractor cutting my grass or something, and we'll start talking. And I'm thinking, we'll say, well, that's good podcast material. So this one was earlier today. We didn't even have this really written out, and we were like, this one would be a good one to share, and hopefully, you get something out of it, and we'll dive deeper in it as we go, and because this really does go around the self-help.
It does.
Type of thinking. And what I hope it also leaves you with is you're not helpless. And, sometimes we feel helpless in our lives because there's so many things that are hitting our lives. And I think the key to this is really being able to take and grab control of those things and really be able to make a difference. It takes work. It takes effort. It takes commitment. I would also tell you, if you have a person in your life that you can talk to about it or get motivated by it, maybe they're in the same position. So it's nice to have a buddy while you're doing this, or a person, I should say. And so, that's another thing to think about. We'll talk about that in the future too. So hopefully you got something out of this.
Yeah. Thank you guys for listening. I hope that as we keep podcasting, I can use parts of my life to inspire these topics.
Update. Yeah.
And keep updated, because I'm growing with everyone else that's in their late 20s, early 30s, trying to figure out life. I feel
early 30s. Oh, that's right.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people that are on a similar path. I know people my age and a little older, a little younger, that are feeling the way that I do, but also you'll continue to feel it. You might feel it in your 50s. You might feel it in your, you know what I mean? It's just one of those things. So,
but you have choices, and you can make things happen. So
yeah. So plan, prioritize, and understand, like, have faith, and just, give yourself some credit, and journal and write down, and just your life will come together. It'll be okay. I have a feeling that it'll be okay. But right now I do feel very scared.
Unsettled.
Yes. So thank you guys for listening. Subscribe, find us on, find us on Spotify, Apple.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
And
Apple,
we're here on
Spotify.
YouTube. Obviously, if you're watching us on YouTube.
We're on the tube.
We love YouTube. But thank you guys, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Peace out.